Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual event, How to Create an Effective Business Continuity Plan, produced by IT Pro Today. This session is titled Business Continuity at What Cost, sponsored by StorageCraft. As a reminder, all of the sessions from today's event will be available on demand for 12 months starting tomorrow. You'll receive an email when the session and the environment are available to be reviewed. If you have any questions for the speaker during this session, please submit them via your webcast interface. And now I would like to introduce our speaker. Sean Darrington is a Senior Director, Product Management at StorageCraft. He has more than 20 years of storage experience. Prior to StorageCraft, Sean led product management at Exalab, acquired by StorageCraft, and Veritas Semantic, and has helped multiple product marketing and management positions covering storage management, cloud, virtualization solutions. Before Veritas, he was the lead storage analyst at Meta Group. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Material Science and Engineering and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and Public Policy, both from Carnegie Mellon University. And with that, I will hand things over to Sean.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. And welcome, everybody. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the show, and good morning and good afternoon, depending upon where you're calling in from. As Ashley said, what we wanted to focus on today is a little bit of business continuity and thinking about things differently. Business continuity is not a new challenge for any organization. It's one of those perpetual tasks that many are asked to say, hey, recover my business as quickly as possible, but you're not going to have any budget to do so, or you're going to have a minimal budget. And that's one of the challenging things that that many of the administrators face when they're looking at not only business continuity, but also just the changing requirements, right? As capacities increase from applications generating more and more storage, data protection and business continuity plans have to adjust for recovering twice as much data in 2 years from now than they were 2 years before. At the same time, there's a lot of new initiatives from organizations and applications saying, hey, I'd like to do this, or we want to expand and take the business in this direction. And you have to accommodate from a business continuity perspective to adjust to that. And many times the legacy scale-up architectures from a storage perspective can complicate things in terms of being time-consuming for forklift upgrades, but also budget-consuming. If you get the planning incorrect in terms of how fast applications are going to grow, that leads to a lot of complications down the road and potentially even increasing the downtime for forklift upgrades and migrations. Right? Just the cost of the business in terms of lost revenue from interruption to business is one of the things that has been driving a lot of business continuity focus. But one of the things, take away one thing from the show is that trying to raise the awareness and making a case for budget isn't always easy. It's obviously something to try to do, but most organizations, as soon as the unfortunate event does happen, that's when the business continuity plans move from number 9 on the top 10 list to number 1 or number 2. So with that, with StorageCraft, we've really been thinking about business continuity from the beginning. We've been focused on the data protection and scale-out storage solutions for years. In fact, ShadowProtect has been around for nearly 13, 14 years. We've recently rebranded that to be ShadowXafe and introduced OneXafe, which begins to combine what was branded OneBlocks, the scale-out storage, with our SLA-driven data protection. So as you look at business continuity, StorageCraft, really recommend that you look at it from a holistic perspective of on-premises in a single data center location, but also, and that's really where the OneSafe Converged solution is, we also have a software-only SLA-driven data protection. So for smaller environments, like a remote office or branch office, or an environment that has dozens of VMs instead of hundreds of VMs, ShadowXafe is a software-only solution for that on-premises data protection. But in both cases, you also have to think about getting the information out of one location and be able to recover in the event that when you go to work, your work's no longer there. And that's really where the cloud services comes into play, where you can actually recover and think about DR as a service as that next level of protection. And when you're taking a look at these things, of OneSafe and ShadowXafe, StorageCraft really take a step back and think about what's going to protect your investment and give you the most flexibility going forward in the coming years. And that's what we've invested in from our own intellectual property of developing our own object store. And when I say a distributed object store, this is what's inside the OneSafe scale-out cluster. So as you have applications requesting information, we look like NFS and SMB to those applications. However, it's much more flexible than that. It really enables you as an admin to think about a pool of storage that multiple applications can use. You can think of them as microservices and defining different storage policies for different application requirements, which is fine, but that doesn't solve the ability to recover an application quickly that's running in a virtual machine necessarily. And that's where we augment this with our data protection services. And all of these file system and data protection services have equal access to immutable objects. And these immutable objects in the object store protect that information so it's available for recovery when you need to do just a normal application access, or if you need to actually recover from the event of a failure, file deletion, VM corruption, whatever the case may be, it gives you that flexibility to do so. But as you're thinking about business continuity and how to maximize not only the availability of those applications through traditional things like application level clustering and using VMware Hyper-V and vMotion and storage vMotion, that's all fine and good. But part of this is also to maximize how much storage can be used in your environment. And that's really where our data protection solutions are augmented with the scale-out storage. So for each converged data protection solution, we have not only the scale-out storage capabilities, but also the ability to do inline deduplication and compression to maximize that storage utilization in your cluster. At the same time, for this converged data protection solution, StorageCraft is unique in that converged OneSafe solution is not only just for data protection, you can also use that same pool of storage for other services, other NFS or SMB applications, where it's primary storage for either unstructured data or even VMware for that case. But for unstructured data, we continue to take continuous snapshots. And these continuous snapshots are providing continuous data protection for that data that doesn't require you to actually back it up anymore. And because all of the objects are immutable, it makes it very easy to trust that the data protection is provided for the applications that are writing the information, that they'll actually be able to get back the same information that they originally wrote to the cluster. And it's a little bit different way of thinking of things in terms of, yes, you need to protect applications through backup recovery mechanisms with the traditional SLA-based policies, but also from an unstructured data perspective, unstructured data, this is something where now you can actually minimize the amount of data you're backing up nightly because you have continuous and unlimited snapshots protecting that. All the snapshots are deduplicated against the primary data, so there's very little data consumed with additional snapshots. At the same time, really thinking about a comprehensive DR strategy. So on-premises, remotely replicating, and/or in the cloud is one of the things to think about. At the same time, you have to think about local protection for drive failures, right? Lots of different events can interrupt your business. A drive failure, a node failure in a cluster, a site failure, all these things have a role to play in providing a business continuity plan. But then when you're looking at these offerings, there's always the budget question, right? Everyone here on the call today can design a fantastic business continuity plan with an unlimited budget. The question is, how do you do that on a fixed budget? And how do you begin to think about storage for different roles, for different purposes, for different application requirements? And that's where you need to look to a portfolio of matching the appropriate storage and the cost with the capabilities that will meet those requirements, right? And that's where OneSafe, we have two different models, if you will, 4412 and 4417, that are capacity-based. These are great for primary storage for unstructured data, cloning of VMs, test dev environments, but also the converged data protection capability that's capacity-based. And so whether you're starting with a handful of terabytes or you have a requirement where you're starting with hundreds or maybe even a petabyte of capacity, you can scale out this cluster to meet your needs not only today, but as you grow over time, your investment is actually protected because you can scale and add more storage capacity without reconfiguring the applications or the backup infrastructure. And so it's very flexible from that perspective. It gives you a lot of insurance, if you will, to ensure that your crystal ball that you were looking at when you initially made a purchase is actually something that is still fairly accurate and be able to be adjusted to over the years. The cost is also one of those things I mentioned, that everybody can design a business continuity strategy that it had with an unlimited budget. But when you're looking at the cost of OneSafe and the 4400 series, this is essentially less than the cost of Amazon S3 storage. So you can have on-premises capacity at less than 3 cents per gig per month. This is all storage that you purchase, and it's in your data center. But it's just from an investment perspective, what you pay up front. Looking at what that utilization is, you'll pay less to own the storage and have it on premises than you would to pay to rent S3 storage. Similarly, the 5410 is our all-flash model, and so depending upon the applications that have those critical recovery requirements, this is where you can use all-flash. And here it's going to be a little more expensive, but with 38 terabytes in a 1U form factor, it really changes the economics, where you're looking at about 20 cents a gig for all-flash, where most organizations would like to use all-flash everywhere, but they can't afford it. And so this is actually something that begins to change that equation that says, for a little bit more money, we can resume our applications in less than a second, as opposed to minutes to hours, depending upon the architecture. So look to a portfolio of storage solutions that's going to match the backup requirements that you have for your applications, but also give you the flexibility to define data protection policies that are flexible for physical and virtual servers, right? Having multiple solutions that are fit for just one physical or just virtual or just a portion of your environment, that's going to complicate things overall and make the operations complex. Then you have multiple technologies to try to satisfy those. And so looking to a solution that has the capability to protect both physical and virtual servers, but also the ability for recovery flexibility, right? If you're backing up a physical server, can you recover that to a different server hardware that's a physical server, or can you recover that in a virtual machine? And vice versa, can you back up a virtual machine and recover it to physical? But what about application integration with virtual technologies like VMware, right? You have to look at the holistic picture about what's going to be the most flexible to protect those applications, depending upon your deployment type, right? Different organizations, as they're planning for business continuity, are going to have different requirements for on-premises. You may have a remote location. You may be looking to a third-party cloud for full disaster recovery as a service because you don't have a second location or colo to replicate to. So that flexibility to protect the application data locally, on the left-hand side, as you see, the primary data, the primary storage for OneSafe. With unstructured data, OneSafe is actually providing the snapshots that are immutable for all that. So you actually don't have to back it up, but you can still replicate that off-site. If you look at the middle of the slide here, that's really where the converged data protection happens, right? This is where either model, the all-flash or hard drive-based models of OneSafe, provide application-level protection for both physical and virtual environments. Whether you have an agent or an agentless deployment model, it's something that OneSafe is running those data protection services in the cluster, doing very fast SAN direct backups, but in a converged solution as opposed to having a separate backup infrastructure with a backup target that's just disk-based, right? And depending upon, again, your requirements for business continuity of protecting stuff in my data center, I can replicate that off-site, as you see in the lower right. I can also replicate that information, look to just a data replication strategy to Azure or S3, or you can look to other providers like StorageCraft has our full disaster recovery as a service, where those applications that are protected locally with OneSafe can be replicated into the cloud, and in a matter of 3 clicks, you can orchestrate the recovery of not only the application, but the data and the networking connectivity back down to a data center of your location, whether it be the primary or an alternate location that you have set up. But that orchestrated workflow for full disaster recovery as a service is part of the spectrum to think about from the far left of how am I going to protect storage just locally with snapshots and replicate? Am I going to do data protection for SLA-based policies for different recovery points in physical and virtual servers? And am I going to get that off-site into the cloud? These are all the things that play into really a comprehensive business continuity strategy, that when you look at that flexibility of, I'm actually an organization that has multiple locations, and I also want to leverage the cloud. Well, with the solution that's flexible for the same software to run on multiple platforms, whether that be all-flash or HDD-based, that's something to look to. And I mentioned earlier, StorageCraft has invested a lot in our intellectual property of writing our own distributed object store. And even though we have object storage underneath the covers, it's not exposed to the applications. It just looks like a converged data protection solution, or it just looks like an SMB or an NFS share. However, all the advantages of object storage you get to take advantage of, but you don't have any of the complexities of trying to have applications write via RESTful APIs. And as you see here in the diagram, this is something that you can do a one-to-one or many-to-many replication strategy depending upon your needs and how many locations you have. But you'll also notice from the picture that this is something that's flexible enough where you have all flash in San Francisco replicating to New York, which is a capacity-based cluster. And you'll also notice that Denver and New York are not configured the same way. Denver has a 5-node cluster. New York has a 7-node cluster. These are all the advantages of a storage architecture that is a scale-out built upon object storage that gives you a flexibility of thinking about just a pool of storage. You don't have to have the clusters identically configured. So as your needs change, if you have all flash, you can replicate to capacity-based. If you have a 100 terabyte problem in Denver and a 700 terabyte problem in New York, that's fine. You can have those different clusters configured appropriately. And as long as you have enough storage capacity on the primary and the secondary, you can remotely replicate that data. But at the same time, you can also take advantage of the fact that because we're object-based, we only replicate the deduplicated and compressed objects from New York to Denver. So when a terabyte changes and it's only 100 gig of data that changes, we'll actually only replicate that 100 gig of deduplicated objects from Denver to New York. So there's actually a few questions that have come in here on the Q&A. So if anybody else does have questions, feel free to post them here. There's a question here about the icons, the locks for the replication. What exactly does that mean? Well, that means two things. Number one, each cluster, you have the opportunity to encrypt that data at rest, as well as the icons on the replication strategy means that we're also encrypting that data in flight. So depending on, if you have a dedicated link, that's great, but if you need to go over the internet and go through a VPN, you can still encrypt that data in flight from San Francisco to New York. And as well as in our cloud, the data is fully protected there as well. There's another question here, back on the pricing. They're asking about, they had heard that StorageCraft enables you to bring your own drives. Is that still true? Yes, that's actually a good point. Both with, I'm going to jump back here for 1 second to this slide here. For both the 4400 and the 5410 models, we enable organizations to bring their own drives. So we support, in this case, up to 12 terabyte hard drives and up to 3.8 terabyte SSDs. On those hard drives, as long as they're enterprise class 7200 RPM drives, you can bring your own drives. And that's significant. That'll make a significant impact on the purchase price of the solution, clearly, because for drives at retail pricing, 12 terabyte are about $450 to $500 a piece, maybe $550 depending upon the brand. Compared that to some of the legacy storage vendors that'll sell you drives at $2,000 and $3,000 for a 12 terabyte drive, you can take advantage of that economic advantage where you can purchase OneSafe, all the software and the subscription services that go along with that in an empty chassis, and then you can basically populate those drives with the drives you purchase at retail pricing. It's particularly advantageous in the 5400 series when you're buying SSDs at retail pricing. We support two different Intel or Samsung SSDs, and there's some specific models there because SSDs have very different characteristics in terms of read-intensive workloads or write-intensive workloads. So we definitely we care about the data well enough that we have a compatibility list for SSDs. But the opportunity to have like an Intel 3.8 terabyte SSD, and for purchasing that at retail pricing at less than $2,000, I think everybody here on the call, I can see a lot of brand names, large organizations, as well as some of the smaller companies here that are on the attendees list for the call. Everybody here knows how much a 3.8 terabyte SSD or even a 1.9 terabyte SSD would be from a legacy storage vendor. It's a far cry from less than $2,000. When you're looking at 10 3.8 terabyte SSDs, you're looking at $20,000 in SSDs, and you're looking at a list price on the hardware for the 5410, about $22,000. So for about $45,000, you have 38 terabytes of all flash. Start using that for primary storage for VMware. Data reduction, you're now looking at 38, 80 terabytes with a little bit of data reduction for less than $50,000. That changes the equation about where you can actually use flash than before. So great question on the bring your own drive model. I'm going to flip back here to the remote replication. Any other questions on the remote replication? Happy to answer. There's a question here. Can you have, and when you're remotely replicating from one site to another, can both sides be read-write? The answer is yes and no to that question. So if you look at the diagram here, the chart, in San Francisco, engineering is the read-write share. And so a share can be read-write on any cluster, and it can be read-only on other clusters. And so in New York, I actually changed the naming on that, so apologies on the slide here, but engineering is read-only in New York, and so you can flip that to be read-write in a matter of 2 mouse clicks with OneSystem, which is our cloud-based management service, but in 2 clicks that can be read-write, but it is one share is read-write, the other is read-only. Okay, so good question. Taking a look at the opportunity for certainly using StorageCraft and our data protection and Converged capabilities, but we also have a lot of customers using third-party backup applications like Veeam or Unitrends, whom we are partners with, including Veritas, and we're a pro partner with Veeam. But I mentioned the pricing and the economics of all flash. That's something that actually has changed a lot of our companies, a lot of our customers' approach to how am I going to protect applications and how quickly can I recover them. And so this is something that you can look at SLA-based data protection for the primary applications that are either hard drive-based or all flash. But when you start to combine that with all flash and the ability to do instant recovery, this is something that changes the game in terms of how fast you can get back up and running. Right? With Veeam, you can actually recover dozens of VMs with OneSafe in less than 2 minutes. And this is something where basically it's just how quickly can you be logging into Windows as opposed to getting the data back from your last recovery point through Veeam. Similarly, OneSafe, we have the capability to do virtual boot, and this enables you to actually recover that application in less than a second. And there is a difference here in terms of how we recover the data versus a typical instant recovery mechanism. When we recover the data, you're actually resuming running that VM, which looks like it's still accessing the primary storage, but StorageCraft, we have patents around the ability to redirect that I/O to the OneSafe cluster and provide that directly from the OneSafe cluster to the VM that thinks it's still getting it from the primary storage. And as it's reading that data and the application is resuming in less than a second, we're moving the data over in the background until everything is done, as opposed to running it off of the storage, doing a recovery, doing a storage vMotion, and taking that additional downtime and those additional steps to do that. So it's something that's very flexible, but when you're looking at the economics here and thinking about business continuity for on-premises recovery, now you have the opportunity to shorten that recovery time objective and get everything back up and running. But also think about how it's going to be managed, right? How are you going to manage information? How are you going to protect thousands of VMs? Many companies have thousands of VMs. Others have hundreds or dozens. Whatever that number is, if you're able to fully understand what those recovery points are and try to manage those in terms of SLAs, how many recovery points do you need for daily, weekly, monthly, and just quickly, in 2 to 3 mouse clicks, figure out this policy I'm going to apply to these 30 VMs. Policy 2 is going to be my gold policy. I'm going to apply to these other 20 VMs. But my platinum, I'm going to apply for on-premises protection and replicate to the cloud. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to define how you want to protect applications in a variety of ways based upon the types of VMs and the criticality to your organization. And that's all done through OneSystem, which is something that skip the command line, keep it very straightforward in terms of what seems simple, but yet very powerful and gives you a lot of flexibility for control through a UI that you see there, which is our cloud-based management service. So with that, see if there are any other questions that have come in here. There's a question here on the storage access. So do you support iSCSI or Fiber Channel? So no, today we support file system services, so you can use either NFS or SMB to access a cluster, and you don't have to allocate storage on a per-share basis. Each NFS, or I should say all the NFS and SMB shares, have equal access to the pool of storage. So you're not carving up runs or volumes and assigning it to an NFS export. You can actually just use all the storage capacity in the cluster. You can set quotas if you want to, but you don't need to. iSCSI is on the roadmap for StorageCraft, but that's not something that we have available today. Okay. Any other questions? Feel free to put those in. I think I've got most of them. There are a couple detailed questions that are more company specific, so I'll follow up with those individuals directly. And if you have any other questions, we'll be monitoring obviously the booth and everything. You can chat with either myself or other experts there. So let me see. Ashley, I'm going to turn it back to you if you have any other housekeeping items to wrap it up.
All right. Thank you, Sean, for your great presentation. It looks like we are out of questions. Thank you again to our sponsor, StorageCraft. Please note that this presentation and all others from today's event will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so feel free to come back and review. Also, be sure to visit the exhibit hall and check out StorageCraft's booth, where you can find some great content, chat with representatives, and check out their great prizes. They do have a $500 gift card giveaway. Our next session begins at 2:45 p.m. Eastern and is entitled Disaster Recovery 101, What to Plan For and How to Choose the Best DR Solution, presented by Jim Martin. Thank you again for attending this session, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.